Welcome, everybody. It's great to see such a big crowd here tonight. I'm just going to introduce our speaker for this evening. I met Dr. Michael Lacrosse a few years ago after my dad passed away, and he has been a really important part of my emotional and spiritual growth. And so when Joe and Lisa asked me to help set up some speakers for family faith formation, he immediately came to mind. I'll just tell you a little bit about Dr. Lacrosse. He has been in practice in Norfolk as a clinical psychologist since 1977, and he is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and a certified approved consultant in clinical hypnosis by the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, of which he is a member, as well as the Minnesota Society of Clinical Hypnosis, the Nebraska Psychological Association, and the National Register of Health Psychologists. His special interests include anxiety disorders, depression, pain, emotional complications of medical illness, and clinical consultation and training. Dr. Lacrosse has interests in marriage and family life and integrating faith with emotional healing and health. You might have seen him at St. Mary's if you ever visit there in Norfolk. I might have mentioned this before, but I thought I would tell this story again. I've mentioned Dr. Lacrosse's name a few times at the convent, and the sisters all go, oh, and a huge smile on their faces. So that tells you right away that he's a good guy. So give him a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Melissa. That was kind. Let's see, I was told to have like 50 handouts. I think I'm a little short. What would be the best way to distribute these? I think there's 3 pages.
Just have a few per table and chair. So.
Melissa, we have until about 8 o'clock. Are there any of us in here young enough to be aspiring to love and marriage? There has to be. Yes, aspiring young people. Good, I'm glad you're here because this is valuable information. I only have about 50 minutes to cover what would actually take about 3 days. So, but the first thing I want to say, I hope this turns out better than it did about 5 miles from here when I had a water bottle malfunction and got doused. It's cold out there. During adoration, I had the thought, Jesus is the only name that contains the actual presence it signifies. The only name. But then I thought of other names. I thought of my wife's name. But the name doesn't actually contain the presence. except in here. That's why sometimes just recalling or reflecting or remembering the sound of some beloved person's voice, someone who's especially close to you, like a spouse, a daughter, a priest, a physician, a minister, can actually change what's going on in your body. So I'm thinking of a colleague that I've learned some things from, who whenever she's an expert on this subject, she's Dr. Sue Johnson, who's referenced in here, and she talks about her fear of flying. She has this plane phobia, but she flies all over the place. The thing that comforts her the most is just closing her eyes and remembering the sound of her husband's voice. So what does all this have to do with what I'm here to talk about? How many people here have been married more than 25 years? Wow. How many people here have been married more than 40 years? You're in a rare area. You know that 67% of marriages divorce within 40 years in our country. And half of all marriages fall apart within 7 years. What does that tell us? It tells us that our culture has been falling apart when it comes to love and marriage and how to make it continue. In fact, the family now has changed so radically that the majority of children don't live with biological relatives. This is a huge shift in society. So when I thought of this as faith and science, I wanted to first think about, what does faith tell us about love? Because everything it tells us, we're discovering is true. Well, we already knew that. In the last 28 or 29 years, people in my field have been studying marriage very carefully, in detail, and making observations and all kinds of scientific study. One researcher went so far as to build an apartment laboratory where he and his colleagues could study couples that would come there for 2 or 3 day weekends. Now this wasn't an ordinary apartment. It was rather small, kind of an efficiency type apartment. But it was an average looking apartment. Except in the kitchen there was this big mirror, but it was a two-way mirror. So people were coding everything they were observing, their facial expressions, looking at all the monitors about their heart rates, and all the other physiological things they were measuring as these people went through a weekend from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Except for the bathroom. There was no observation, and after 9 p.m., no observations. They found amazing things. For example, when a couple had an argument, it took men about 3 times as long for their bodies to calm down compared to women. And they determined this by measuring their heart rates, by measuring various hormones in their system, particularly the stress hormones. So when you all got married, do you remember anyone talking about a new role you were going to have. For the first time in your life, now you're responsible for helping somebody else get to heaven. Remember that? I didn't see any hands. That's a big responsibility. It's difficult enough alone, especially since there's really nothing you can do to get to heaven, except what you were doing a little while ago in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Letting Him come to you, right? Pursue you, bring you in. Love is not a mystery anymore. We always thought it was a pretty mysterious thing. I mean, I hear people tell me that a lot. Well, it's just something I kind of fell out of. But love isn't something you fall out of or fall into. It's only because we really didn't understand how it works. But it was right in front of us all the time. We're the smartest of the mammals. Because we can reflect on our existence, our awareness of ourselves, awareness that other people have selves. What I've given you to look at this crazy little diagram looks like geometry. I won't belabor this. This was just something that came to me many years ago. But I couldn't figure out, like, I saw this big sign for marriage encounter. It was, two circles intersecting with a cross above it. And I looked at that and I thought, something's missing. Because that's not a union. Those two circles overlapping are just two things intersecting. If they were a union, one would be on top of the other. My first experience seeing couples in 1975 or so, it was often a farm couple, a young couple. They would come to us because one of them, usually the wife, had left. And she broke out of the husband's circle, but the husband's circle was within his parents' farm. And she was stuck in it. Because he wanted that farm someday. And he was going through a lot to try to keep his wife happy and his parents. Because Mom used to come into their home and say, hey, this place isn't as nice as I used to keep it. And by the way, you guys are spending too much money. And I don't like the way you're raising these kids. So she's out of there. Now she's sitting in my office with her kids. And she knew exactly what she needed to do. She said, it's either me or them. He's got to claim me. He's got to get between me and the farm, or he's going to lose me. Sometimes he lost her. Sometimes he claimed her, but then he would have difficulty getting that farm You ever heard of anything like that? That's a union, but it's not healthy. She was lost in his circle, and he was lost in his folks' circle. And he hadn't really become himself yet. So then one day I got to thinking, well, what would make a marriage a union? Well, you just have to draw something around it, right? At the bottom. Oh, then the space around it is bigger than the couple put together. And isn't marriage like that? Isn't it bigger than the two of you put together? Yeah. Couples usually talk to me about us. They have this sense of what I call usness. Because they've accomplished a union, and they've done this through lots of hard work. And they've united themselves spiritually. Because from the moment they married in the church, their marriage existed in God. And as long as they're on this earth, it will exist in Him. What an advantage. I won't say any more about this. But I did want to leave you with that, just because sometimes geometry makes people sense. All of you who've been married and have children know that as long as you and your spouse remain the center of the family, things will go well. I don't see a lot of parents here who are in their 30s, but you and I both know how much family life today centers around the activities of kids. You know, I have 6 grandkids, and 3 of them play basketball in Omaha. And frankly, when we go down to our place there, I'd like to have some time alone. But gee whiz, everything is hovering around these games. 3 different kids, 3 different places to play, 3 different, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or parents that come into me when their kids leave for college, and they're just kind of looking at each other and saying, now what do we do? They've kind of lost touch. And their kids quickly learn as soon as they leave home that the world will not revolve around them. The parents are under some pressure because they go to games. But last week, maybe they weren't there, and somebody says, hey, where were you guys last week? What's up? Oh, we had a date. We had a date? When I was a kid playing ball, whatever sport it was, year-round, my parents would say things like, yeah, we might come to your game, but we're going out with Millie and Colin. And we got a date anyway. So if we can get there, we'll get there. What were they telling me? They were the center of the family. Not my game. And my dad taught me everything about a bat and a ball. Heck, I went to college thinking that was what I was going to do for a career. That didn't last very long. There were lots of good players down south. And kids from upstate New York weren't among them. So you are the center of the family, and even as grandparents, you still retain that position in many ways. And of course, everyone knows that family life is the center of social stability. Because without that stability, what happens? People get disconnected. People who study love scientifically, which you couldn't even say when I was in school, because if you talked about love, that was like too soft. What's that got to do with studying something scientifically? That's for poets and philosophers. Well, the people who study this are basically telling us now that they've cracked the code. And I've tried to tell you what they've come up with in a very, summary fashion. What are referred to as the laws of love. When you look at these and you think that it took us centuries to come up with a scientific explanation for love, you're sitting there going, duh? But such things are not easy to study. We couldn't always observe couples in action. On the bright side, what's known now is that love can be restored. We can reshape love in relationships. It can be restored where it's been lost. Most couples drift apart slowly. Just saw someone this afternoon, young woman, 29. She said the other night, I finally went downstairs. My husband asked me, would I please come down while he plays video games? She says, I hate video games. So I took my book and I went down and I just sat next to him. I said, well, what was he doing? Getting you down there while he's playing video games. You hate video games. I don't know. I said, you know. What did he want? Well, I guess he just wanted me next to him. I said, right. Law number 1. What does it say?
Survival code, regulating.
Survival code. We are made for connection. Isn't that what God has been telling us all along? We are made for Him. We are made to be connected to Him. He wants us to share in His glory, so He made us. When I tell a high school student that's what life is all about, they look at me with like I'm totally nuts. I'm talking about kids that, have been brought up with faith. It sounds so way out there and so abstract. Until they tell me that they sleep with their dog. Oh, really? How come? Oh, I love her next to me. Don't tell any of the guys on my team that. So what do you like? Well, I like how she kind of cozies up to me and I can just kind of pet her. What is that? It's the stuff of life. We were made for connection. We can't help it. It's built into us. We must do it. It's our most basic instinct, if you will. It's stronger than sex. It's stronger than aggression. We have to be connected. What happens to people who suffer from loneliness? They have 300 times the risk of heart attacks or strokes. That means they're 3 times more likely, 300% more likely to have that kind of health problem. Because we're all made as one functioning system, right? Mind, body, spirit, can't separate one from the other. Okay, all of you ladies, the way your boyfriends, your fiance, your husbands love you, it's pretty much based on their relationship to their mothers. Our first caregivers, that's who we attach to. That's what we learn. That's built into us through experience. So romantic love becomes kind of a grown-up version of mother-child attachment, or mother-father-child attachment. It's really not surprising. Have you ever run into people that said, well, don't coddle that boy. Don't pick him up. Right? Make him tough. It's not long ago that we urged parents to be careful not to make their kids dependent. But we're healthy when we're dependent. Do you have a river here in Osmond? There's no river here, is there?
Correct. Not really a river.
It gets to be a river.
Okay. Well, what if you have a flood?
Yeah.
Okay. Would people come over from Randolph? Plainview? Sorry, subject. Plainview then? Pierce? Wausau? Of course they would. Why? Because they're connected to you. Strangers, what did we see in Houston last year? Just make you cry. As heartbreaking as all of that was for the people who lived there. But to see human beings at their best. Why did that fellow a few years ago up in Sioux Falls, when the little Sioux Falls was raging in the March or April, remember that? I think he was a vet. He dove in there and saved that little boy and drowned. Didn't know him. Jesus said, what greater love, right? To lay down your life for a friend. Well, that wasn't even a friend. It's just a little boy who was drowning. So we have that built into us. And look at soldiers. They die for each other every day. Sometimes I've had to ask a husband and a wife, are you willing to die for each other? If you were going to, if something happened. I don't know. And sometimes they say, hell no. Look at the third law, because being connected makes us strong. I mean, every football team knows that. I mean, listen Monday night, what did the coach for Clemson say? It's exactly what he said. We derive our strength from the love that we have for each other, from the bond that we share. We're united in our common goal of excellence, and trying to find out our mysterious potentials. My wife grew up about 8 miles from me. We went to the same high school together. I owe everything to her brother. Because when I look at my kids and my grandkids, and I think, gee, without Rick, without him telling me never go near her. That's what he told me. He was a year ahead of me. You know, we were both sophomores, and he was a junior. And we were at a cheerleading tournament, and I was going with another girl then, and he was telling me one day about his sister. I only knew her by name. Because our school, you know, the guys were on one side, girls were on the other side, so we only saw each other at lunch. Well, she wasn't in my lunch, so I didn't know her. He said, well, when I see her, I walk on the other side of the street. Wow, this sounds bad. Well, gosh, 2 months later, I took his sister on her first date. That was 51 years ago. All because of her brother Rick. When we learn how to tune into our spouses, we have power. What is power? It's control. When do we have control? When we can make something happen or not happen. Either way. So, when you're in tune emotionally with someone you love, what needs are getting met? This isn't on your sheet, but we only have 4 emotional needs. We need to belong. We need to have power. We need to have freedom. And we need to have fun. Those are our emotional needs. You go anywhere on the planet, that's what human beings need in their emotional lives. Sometimes all those lives are met, or all those needs are met simultaneously. You can think of this, you know, you're playing a touch football game at Thanksgiving with all your relatives. The needs for belonging, control, freedom, and play are being met simultaneously. Sometimes work is play, because all those needs are getting met at the same time. And for some relatives, play is work, right? We're not in tune with each other. So if you want to feel safe in your relationship, you want to feel really connected, pay attention to what each other feels. It's not difficult. I'll give you an example. Like I said, my wife grew up in a neighborhood, wasn't so good. Not far from the inner city. When I went to her house, there were 3 locks on the door and a crutch between the handle on the door and the first step in the back hall. I thought, man, this family is concerned about safety. So naturally, when we moved to Norfolk in '75 for a year, she wanted a deadbolt on our door. Brand new apartment. The owner said, we don't put deadbolts on. Who needs a deadbolt? If you want one, you'll have to put it on yourself. She didn't feel safe without that deadbolt. So I had a choice, because I thought, we don't need a deadbolt. You know, we don't have any money, we don't need to do that. But something said to me, listen, stupid. Don't say that. Because you'll be right, you'll be dead right. You'll be dead right. You see, it doesn't matter what the truth is about things like that. That's the most frequent kind of argument you have, isn't it? The truth argument. This is what happened. No, it isn't. I said this. No, you didn't. Whatever it is, we're in conflict over the truth, but that's not the issue. Somehow, and maybe this was my guardian angel at work, I don't know, go with the deadbolt. Support that, because it makes her feel safe. You want to be part of what makes your spouse feel safe. So now, if we're gone for, when we come back from Omaha, sometimes she'll say, would you go downstairs and check? Make sure nobody got in. And I want to say, what? The door's not broken into, the windows are locked. And then it hits me. Go down there. Walk around. Did you look in the closet? Yeah. I've learned that. Did you look in the storm cellar? Yeah. See, I used to think that was so irrational. And hey, I'm a psychologist. I'm kind of dedicated to reason, good thinking and all that sort of thing. Does not apply. What applies is being in tune. Yes, I look. And she would say, I know it's stupid, but I appreciate it. So that's sort of an example of two married people holding each other tight. Dr. Johnson talks about hold me tight conversations. When she says things that I know it's crazy, I know there's not really anybody down there, but it makes me feel better. Sometimes that kind of love doesn't seem to make sense, but it does. Because you're there for your spouse. That's the issue. Are you there for me emotionally? Boy, there's no woman I've ever seen in marital work that hasn't really been asking that question. Are you there for me emotionally? Here's an example. In the fourth law, we don't have too many options. Attunement is about reaching out and someone responding, right? Reaching out, someone responding. Giving, receiving, right? What happens when that fails? You reach out in some way to your partner and it fails. What do you do? I mean, this would happen just with a friend. What do? You do it again. Did you hear me? You do it again. You don't get a response. You start to complain. You start to criticize. You start to push. You start to get angry because you're not fulfilled in your connection. That's the second move or strategy that we have. We only have one more. Because if you complain, right, you bitch and moan and criticize your partner enough, what's going to happen?
Turn away.
Who said turn away? That's exactly what happens. So a few weeks ago, I have a couple in my office. They've been married 43 years. He's looking here. His wife is, I'm over here. His wife is over here looking at me, telling me everything that's wrong with him. For 43 years. I look at him and I say, what's going on? He says, I've been hearing that forever. That doesn't bother me anymore. And I leaned in my chair right in front of him and I said, that's impossible. What do you mean? It's impossible that doesn't bother you. It only doesn't bother you now because you've learned to numb out your longing for your connection with your wife. Right? And I just get this blank stare. Like, he's now in a hypnotic state. Literally. I wasn't expecting that. And then what happens? I turn to his wife. But just before I turn to her, I see something. I see a tear in his eye. His wife sees the tear in his eye. I said, you notice that tear? I asked him, what is that? What brings that tear? He said, I just remembered our first fight on our honeymoon. Really? You remember that? She said, you remember that? I don't even remember that. She says, of course I remember it. I kept thinking, did I make the right move here? When we're stuck there, we're stuck. And that's what happens to couples as they gradually drift apart. And what does that make them vulnerable to? Attention. Right? You have a phone, you're having trouble with your marriage, you meet someone else at work, attention, they're not doing so hot at home either, pretty soon. They're getting to know each other via text. That's how it happens nowadays. I had a couple whose husband was having an affair by text, by instant messaging with a woman in South Africa he'd never met. And let me tell you, it was racy. Because she went down to their provider and printed off all those text messages. You know, it read like what would have been considered like at least a B movie in the 1950s. This was a hot and heavy romance by text. It's sad. But it happens, and it happens a lot now. The guy that had the laboratory set up and for 40 years studied couples, for the first time in the history of the world, had 40 years of data about how couples work, what makes them last, and what makes them fall apart. Instead of somebody's theory or somebody's idea or concept. Because when I went through school, we learned all of these things. And I asked, well, but where's the support? Well, that'll come. Well, the fact is it didn't come. We spent 30 years training couples to become better communicators, and you know what? It didn't save their marriages. It only helped the couples who already had a really good connection. They just got better. It doesn't work. What works? Knowing how to respond to your spouse's bid for contact. Like, hey, did you help me make the coffee? Nah, I'm busy. You never help me make the coffee anymore. Remember when you used to? And what's the next step? Hey, I'm going for coffee, see you later. I put on there at the top of that one page the 4 horsemen of the marital apocalypse. You've heard of the 4 horsemen. No, they didn't go to Notre Dame. It's not those guys. Okay. John Gottman is a Jewish guy. Whenever he talks, you know, he has his yarmulke on. I like that. I always wonder how they get the beads in those. I never got a chance to ask him. He said there are 4 things when he interviews a couple for less than 10 minutes. These are the things he looks for. And his research allows him to predict 91% of the time whether a couple will fall apart. And these are the key things. And we all do them. Have I ever criticized my wife? Have I ever gotten defensive when she criticized me? Have I ever acted superior to her in some way? You know, we joke about things like that, but you know, that's oftentimes going on in marriage, where one person is a little bit smug about something they're superior to. That one, number 3, contempt, that's the strongest predictor of the demise of a marriage. The 4th one he called stonewalling. It's a really interesting one, because he's sitting there and his wife's criticizing him and he's thinking, only 10 more minutes till the game. I only have to listen to this for 10 more minutes. Then it'll be over. The game will be on. What's he doing? Stonewalling. Completely disregarding her message, her effort to reach out to him. But when you're getting criticized, it doesn't feel like anybody's reaching out to you, because we naturally react to criticism as a danger signal, right? Criticism is some kind of rejection. Our brain doesn't like it. It doesn't do this to criticism. It does that. I've been talking too long because I told you this could go on for about 3 days. It's 5 minutes to 8. If you need, I'm willing to stay past 8 o'clock. Those of you who are still awake, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Comments, complaints. Anything resonate to you? Anything stand out? Do you have kids? Grandkids? what would you want to tell them? One or two things you want to remember from tonight about this presentation. What would you like to tell your kids, your grandkids?
Listen,
Pardon me?
listen to the other person.
Yes. Listen. What will we listen for? Listen for the sound of the voice, the expression of the face.
Feelings.
Yes. Listen for the emotion. You can go anywhere on earth. You don't have to know the language to interpret what somebody's experiencing emotionally, right? All you have to see is their face or hear their voice. Because our nervous system is very specially designed. It's really amazing. One nerve in particular that makes our face do all those subtle things. Our eye muscles, the muscles that regulate our vocal intonations. These things are hardwired into us because they're necessary for survival.
I worry about that with our technology because our young generation is learning how to communicate with their phones and technology, and they're not working with each other face to face and seeing emotion on people's faces. They're living